You don't remember the first time your parents said, "We can't afford it." You remember the feeling. It followed you everywhere. You were 7 years old. A classmate invited everyone to his birthday party. There were balloons, pizza. Your mom smiled and said you'd see if you could go. You already knew what that meant. The answer wasn't, maybe. It was, probably not. A few days later, you told your friend you had family plans. You didn't. You spent that Saturday watching cartoons while pretending you didn't care. That was the first lie money taught you to tell. Not because you wanted to deceive anyone, because sometimes it hurt less than saying, "We can't afford it." As the years passed, you became strangely good at noticing things other kids never saw. You noticed when your parents whispered after you went to bed. You noticed unopened bills sitting on the kitchen table. You noticed the way your father stared silently at his phone after checking his bank account. You noticed your mother's smile become just a little smaller whenever a school trip was announced. Nobody explained any of this. They didn't have to. Children understand more than adults think. You learned that every light switch mattered. Every grain of rice mattered. Nothing was wasted. A broken chair wasn't thrown away. It was repaired. Shoes weren't replaced because they looked old. They were replaced only when the soles gave up completely. Birthdays became homemade cakes. Christmas became gratitude instead of gifts. You didn't complain, not because you were unusually mature, because you could see your parents trying to make very little feel like enough, trying to protect you from worries they carried every single day. Sometimes they succeeded. Sometimes they didn't. There were evenings when dinner was quieter than usual, not because anyone was angry, because everyone was thinking about tomorrow. Would the electricity stay on? Would there be enough for groceries? Would the rent be paid on time? Nobody asked those questions out loud, but somehow, everyone heard them. As you grew older, something changed inside you. You stopped asking for toys, stopped asking for new clothes, stopped asking for things your friends had. You began answering your own wishes before anyone else could. "No, it's okay. I don't really need it. I'll be fine." Those words became automatic. Years later, people would call you humble, responsible, easygoing. They never realized those qualities were born from necessity, not personality. Growing up poor teaches you something invisible. It teaches you to shrink your own desires before life has the chance to shrink them for you. And after enough years, you stop knowing the difference. You think that's just who you are. But it isn't. It's survival. And survival has a way of disguising itself as identity. As you got older, you became an expert at pretending. Not pretending to be rich. Just pretending everything was normal. You learned that there were two versions of your life, the one people saw, and the one that waited for you at home. At school, you laughed with everyone else. You talked about movies you never watched, vacations you never took, restaurants you had never been inside. Sometimes you'd nod during conversations, just so nobody would ask you a question, because one question could expose everything. Your friends complained that their phones were already a year old. You were still using one that froze every few minutes. You laughed with them anyway, not because it was funny, because staying invisible felt safer than explaining. Then came school trips. The permission slip would land on your desk. Everyone celebrated. You already knew the conversation waiting at home. You still handed the paper to your parents. Not because you expected a different answer, because part of you hoped. Hope has a strange way of surviving, even when experience keeps proving it wrong. A few days later, you'd tell the teacher you couldn't make it. No explanation. Just, "I won't be coming." Eventually, teachers stopped asking why. You became the kid who simply didn't go. Birthdays became harder, not your own, other people's. watching your friends exchange expensive gifts while you searched every store for something meaningful that fit your family's budget. Sometimes you wrapped it so carefully, hoping the wrapping paper would distract from what was inside. You became incredibly grateful for small things, because small things were all you ever expected. Then high school arrived, and something changed. People started comparing shoes, clothes, phones, brands. Suddenly, what you owned became part of who people thought you were. You looked down at your sneakers. They were clean, but they'd been repaired more than once. You learned to keep them spotless, because clean looked newer, and newer invited fewer questions. You became good at taking care of old things, not because you enjoyed it, because replacing them wasn't an option. You avoided inviting friends to your house, not because you were ashamed of your family, because you were afraid someone would see the cracked walls, the old furniture, the tiny kitchen, and decide you were different. Looking back, nobody probably cared as much as you imagined, but that's what growing up poor does. It teaches you to anticipate judgment, even when nobody is judging you. The hardest part wasn't having less. It was constantly wondering if everyone else could tell. Could they notice your backpack was older? Could they see your lunch was smaller? Did they realize you always said no whenever plans cost money? Eventually, you stopped waiting for invitations. It hurt less that way. You convinced yourself you preferred staying home. Sometimes you even believed it. That's the strange thing about survival. Do something long enough, and it starts feeling like your personality. You didn't become quiet because you were born quiet. You became quiet because silence was cheaper. You didn't become independent because you wanted to. You became independent because asking for help usually came with guilt. And somewhere during those years, without realizing it, you stopped dreaming about becoming rich. You started dreaming about never having to worry. There is a difference, a very big difference. High school ended. You thought everything would change the moment you started earning your own money. It didn't. The paycheck was new. The fear wasn't. The first time your salary hit your account, you checked the balance over and over. Not because you didn't trust the number, but because you were already calculating how fast it would disappear. Rent, transportation, groceries, utilities, internet, unexpected expenses. Before you even spent $1, every dollar already had somewhere to go. Your friends celebrated payday. You celebrated making it through another month. They saw money as freedom. You saw it as time. How many days before I'm back at zero? That's what growing up poor does. Most people look at money and see possibilities. You look at it and see responsibilities. Bills, groceries, gas, insurance, the next emergency that hasn't happened yet. Every dollar already has a job before it reaches your hands. Then something strange begins to happen. You start saying no, even when you can afford to say yes. Dinner with friends. No thanks. A weekend trip. Maybe next time. New clothes. These still work. People call you disciplined, but sometimes it's not discipline. It's fear disguised as responsibility, because your mind still remembers empty cupboards, late-night conversations about bills, and pretending you didn't really want something you couldn't afford. The broke mindset doesn't disappear when your income grows. It just gets quieter, waiting for the next problem. Then, one evening, you realize something. Your bills are paid. There's food in the fridge. Money is still sitting in your account. Yet your body still feels like it's preparing for disaster. That's when it finally hits you. The problem isn't your bank account anymore. It's the survival mindset you've carried for years. So you make one small promise. A piece of every paycheck belongs to your future. Not today's worries, not tomorrow's temptations, your future. At first it's difficult. Every instinct tells you to spend it, just in case. But you don't. Month after month, your savings slowly grow. Not fast enough to impress anyone, but enough to change something inside you. For the first time, your money isn't disappearing. It's staying. You stop checking your bank account every hour. You sleep a little better. You breathe a little easier. And you realize something powerful. Wealth isn't the moment you become rich. It's the moment fear stops making your decisions. That's when your life finally starts moving in a different direction. Not because you suddenly had more money, but because, for the first time, you finally had room to breathe.